Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's SecurityBoulevard.com program, brought to you by Techstrong and Nudge Security. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting panel ahead. First, I do need to cover just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, maybe you'd like to rewatch at a later time or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be sent to you shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, we want you to send those in to us using the Q&A tab, which can be found on the right side of your screen. That's also where you're going to find the chat tab, and that's where we want you to get to know your fellow audience members. Let us know your thoughts throughout today's program, or maybe just from where you're joining us. And of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around for the duration of today's program. Today's topic is debunking the stupid user myth in security. And I'm joined by Russell Spitler, CEO and co-founder of Nudge Security, Dr. Aaron C.K., PhD, J. Rex Fuqua, Professor of Management and Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at Duke University. And we have our very own Mike Rothman, Chief Security Officer at Techstrong Group and GM of Techstrong Research. So Aaron, Russell, and Mike, I really appreciate all of you being here with me today. Mike, do you want to go ahead and take it from here?
Thank you, Cody, for that introduction. I'm here today with Mike Rothman and Aaron K., who are going to help me walk through some of the research that we've been doing at Nudge Security. But before we get into that, brief introduction. So Russell Spitler, I'm the CEO of Nudge Security, a new startup focused on making security work for modern work, really focused on how we engage employees to make them part of the cybersecurity solution. Mike, do you want to give us a brief introduction?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Russ. I'm Mike Rothman. I am general manager of Techstrong Research, longtime security practitioner and analyst. And I guess I'm here to, really contribute the security program view of the world, since, we've largely failed in terms of getting users to do what we need them to do over the last, 25, 30 years. So definitely interested in hearing about, both Aaron's research and Nudge as an alternative to, kind of get folks to do what they should already know how to do.
And Aaron?
Yes, thanks for having me. My name's Aaron K. I'm a professor at Duke University, both in the Fuqua School of Business and the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience. And my research, I'm a social psychologist, so I focus on how people are motivated by and react to things that other people do. And a lot of that comes down to how people feel motivated by the decisions organizations make, what they think about the decisions their institutions make, and how they either come to go along with them or resist them. And so I've been an advisor working with Russell at Nudge and trying to apply that type of research to the security space, which has been very exciting.
Excellent. Thank you. So as we get started, this is a really exciting topic for me. For the last almost 20 years, I've been building cybersecurity products that primarily just make a list of things for cybersecurity experts to go run down. And as we came around to founding Nudge, one of the major motivations that I had was kind of a reflection on the state of the industry, which is we're continuing in a place where we don't have enough cybersecurity expertise, we have too much technology, and we don't have enough people helping us out. And so that was really the focus with Nudge. How do we start engaging the employees in our organization and taking advantage of their natural intellect motivations and capabilities in order to start solving some of the critical security problems with cybersecurity, and in particular, the adoption of SaaS services. And so this drove us to starting to work with Aaron here and really focus on some psychological research that can help stand as the foundation for a lot of the work that we're doing. And so today we're going to walk through a little bit of that research, give you an understanding of what we did, the methodology that we took, and some of the key takeaways. And then finally, Mike and I are going to discuss a little bit about how that might impact some of the decisions and motivations of how you structure your security program. So without any further delay, let me introduce you to the research that we started with here. So our focus here was trying to present someone with a pretty traditional task that they might be tasked with accomplishing during a work day. So they receive access to a file from a partner outside their organization, which happens every single day. And the partner sends the secure email link to access the file from an online file sharing app. In this case, it was a fictitious app as opposed to avoid introducing any preconceived prejudice with the participants, which we call DocuBox. And then they were asked to click on the link in the email to access the file. Now, with the participants, we actually split them into 3 different conditions. And so a third of them received a blocking condition. And for all of us who've worked at larger organizations or places with strong network controls, I'm sure you've run into this before. But as they tried to navigate to that link, they received a screen telling them that they were not able to access that site. The second condition was allowing them to go through, but then as a result, there was some punitive action that was taken because they were not following corporate policy. And then the final scenario was the nudging scenario, where we did allow them to go through that, but then we provided a gentle nudge in order to collect more information and help fully understand the context of what they're trying to execute that day. With this, we then asked the participants about their perception, their emotions as it relates to that intervention, and the behavior. Now, when we first put this research together, I was a little bit surprised by the introduction of perception and emotion. And I think that probably is a little bit telling on the state of the cybersecurity industry, where I didn't really see those as wholly relevant aspects to this. So, Aaron, could you give us a little bit of insight into why these are such important factors to capture as we perform a psychological survey like this?
Sure, happy to. So, you know, the basic idea that this is all rooted in is that it's a really robust psychological phenomenon we've known about since 60s, maybe, called reactance. It's sort of something that happens in the human mind in which the degree to which we value something will actually increase if it's taken away from us. So we've evolved to want our freedom, especially in in a lot of Western countries. Freedom is very important to us. And if something happens that removes our ability to choose a particular thing, it doesn't really matter what that thing is. If we disliked it to begin with, or we loved it to begin with, if it's taken away from our decision set, we actually like it even more, or dislike it a little less, or whatever it is. And the way that happens is that when these things are taken from us, it creates a feeling of emotional, like an aversive emotional feeling. And that emotion leads us to want to, why do I feel that way? Well, I feel that I'm mad. I think that someone did something unreasonable. And it's those things that drive our behavior. So behavior is ultimately the variable that we would care about in a security space. But behavior is really driven from how we feel and why we think, how we feel about the decision someone makes on our behalf, and what we think are the reasons behind that decision. And it turns out that if that decision happens to be taking something away that I think I should have access to, I'm going to believe it was done for an illegitimate reason. I'm going to have these negative feelings, and that should drive behavior. So when we were measuring the degree to which this would happen in a security context, I tried to help Russell and the group understand the degree to which we needed to know if perception and emotion were moving, because if they are, then we're going to have a really good understanding of why behavior is also moving, and we have to understand the process to really affect it.
Yeah,
hopefully that helps.
Yeah, Aaron, that's curious stuff, and I come from the same spot, right, as Russ does, which is, I've been a security person for longer than I care to admit, right, and we have a certain playbook for how we tend to do things, and at least I've kind of broken stuff up into a couple of different groups of folks, right? You have the folks that just follow the rules because they follow the rules. Right. And the rules say don't do that. So, if you give them a little bit of training, they don't do that. Right. And then there are people who, flout the rules because they can flout the rules. And I mean, as you're researching it, this is a more broader question, but where do some of those kind of penchants of rule following, kind of fit into a lot of the psychographic research that you do to try to isolate different behaviors?
So, yeah, that's an interesting point. And there are two levels to that. There are people who tend to get more upset when their restrictions are taken away. And we can, in fact, measure that. Something that Nudge could do in the future, and that they're thinking about, is, in fact, allowing organizations to measure the degree to which people differ and how they would respond to having restrictions taken. But beyond that, even though some people are more likely to care and some people are less likely to care, it's pretty universal that everyone gets to some degree more attracted to things that are taken away from them. So whereas you might get really upset about it and Russell might care a little less, that might be the norm, but both of you are going to like that thing a little more as it's taken away. Yep. So you can moderate or modulate the strength of the reaction based on these individual differences, but across a population, it's a very strong effect. And that's also the point of the random assignment in these studies, to see across condition, are we seeing an overall effect of nudging versus blocking or being punitive that might be stronger for some, weaker for others, but it's there.
No, that's great. That's great.
So, Aaron, fully apologize for potentially trivializing or overlooking some of the subtleties of the reactance principle. But when you first described this to me, one of the things that was most accessible in terms of understanding it was, frankly, the Matrix trilogy, right? And in that scenario, you had a environment where people preferred this horrible, underscale, dystopian environment as opposed to New York City in 1999. And that really helped me kind of understand okay, even in that scenario, that human psyche is driving us to this horrible dystopian future as opposed to the reality, which is presented in a very pleasant way. Now, not obviously wholly applicable, but it's a great way for me, at least how I started to understand that. So as we drive into the research here, one of the areas that obviously is important is making sure that we have a strong enough base so that we're not getting any bias in terms of who we're sampling and the nature of the sample size. So to give you guys an understanding of the scope of the work that we did here, we had 900 participants, and those participants came from a variety of industries. And this is a pretty standard cross-section of what you might find out there in the workforce today. And then along those same lines, we saw a nice cross-section of the different roles that they performed in that. This is another interesting area as you kind of think about the cybersecurity impact that people in different roles might play. And in the past, we might have assumed that, well, the people in potentially engineering who are building your critical systems, or in IT who are really administering the sort of, infrastructure and the technology that you use in your organization are really the critical participants. But the reality is today, especially when you kind of imagine how your technology is being used in your organization, every single employee in your organization can be on the front lines. Every single employee in your organization actually ends up making security critical decisions for your organization, whether that's as simple as uploading your customer database to a marketing website, or trying to run a new campaign, or somebody in the finance organization trying to make better sense of their numbers and using some analytics tool that they found available to them. Each one of those steps has an impact. And so we really wanted to focus on making sure that we had a good cross-section of those participants by role to make sure that we had a good representation of behavior across that. Aaron, anything else that you'd like to add on the demographics?
No, I mean, just that it's important to have, when we're doing research like this, it's important to have enough people. So you want your cross-section, and you want enough people so that anything we find, we know is a reliable, real finding, couldn't have happened by some sort of fluke. And with 900 people here across three conditions, that's scientifically or mathematically anyways, effects that we find and the size of effects we do find. These are big sample sizes. They're not big sample sizes if you wanted to say this many Americans prefer one presidential candidate over another, but they're big sample size to detect is a manipulation, is a different way of treating some reliably changing behavior. And so I just want to point out that this is the size of people was well thought out.
Excellent. So as we go into the different interventions, these are the three scenarios. So a third of those people were presented, and to remind you, when they were presented a link saying, hey, please access this file shared to you from a trusted business partner. A third of the people ended up with this site, web page blocked. And all of us have seen some variation of this during their life. But here they had a hard block where they had, where the technical controls in place of their organization prevented them from accomplishing that task that they were set for. The second scenario that we had was a punitive intervention. So in this scenario, they were actually allowed to complete the task. However, shortly after completing the task, they received an email saying that their use of DocuBox was discovered during a routine IT audit, and they had to take a mandatory security training module within, 1 week in order to proceed. And then the third scenario was the one that we're really focused on at Nudge Security, which is the task was allowed to proceed. However, engagement was done in a manner that was not punitive and did not close anything off, where they was just requesting more information. So you just started using DocuBox. It's not commonly used by employees. Can you help us understand why you chose to create an account in DocuBox today? And that was provided with a simple prompt and then a request for more information. Mike, as you kind of think about those three scenarios, what in your experience sort of leads you to think one might be more effective than another?
Well, the whole blocking thing. I mean, we've been doing that since the beginning of time, right? I mean, it's kind of like, oh, can't go that, don't do that, without a lot of context for why those decisions are being made, whether it's a legitimate, kind of request, whether there's business criticality, and urgency to those kind of things. I mean, there are certainly command and control type environments where, if it doesn't fit into the list of things that we say are good, or it's on the wrong list of stuff that we think is bad, we just block it out of hand. And obviously there's no real nuance there. I think, kind of the next level, which is, the punitive intervention. And I don't know that it's really punitive. What at least the general idea was, you have somebody, they've clicked on something, you have an opportunity to educate them as to whether that's good, whether that's bad, whether they should have done it, whether they shouldn't have done it. And because it's close to the time that they, basically took the action, there should be a greater mental link. And I'm probably in deep water now with an actual social psychologist on the call about that stuff. But that's what security people rationalize themselves to believe, that by educating folks, closer to the time they took the action, they would be in a situation where, they would learn not to do that stuff again. But to me, the nudge is really, kind of an innovation on the part of trying to be more employee and user friendly, right? It's this idea that, I mean, we don't know why you're doing this. There's probably some legitimate reason. We're going to, again, go back to the old security idioms, right? Trust but verify. We think you're a good person. You're acting in the best behavior or best, reasons relative to your judgment for our organization. We're just doing something that we're not quite sure what it's about. So let's find out more, as opposed to putting you in the penalty, but one, either blocking you out of hand, right? Or putting you in a penalty box for a certain amount of time. Let's, be a little bit more considerate about, this approach. And again, I think that it's far more employee friendly than anything that I think I've ever seen come out of security folks. Cause, most of the time we look at it from the standpoint that existential risk. Oh my God, somebody's going to die, or we're going to lose data, or we're going to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, kind of pull the fire alarm and hit the button and all that other stuff. And I think that there's some nuance in life, and, there's some nuance in how we do things. And this is kind of an interesting approach to try to apply that nuance to helping users make, kind of the right decisions to control the risk of the organization.
I think that's a really great kind of overview. And one of the stories that was shared with me just as an antidote in that blocking scenario was just a classic example of some of the subtlety of behavior. So my friend was trying to hit a release date, and she was running her engineering organization, and they had 2 weeks left to go. And they ended up with a problem in one of the open source packages that they had leveraged in their product. And in order to get support with that open source package, the only opportunity available was through a Discord channel, which is obviously technology that should never be allowed in an enterprise. And so unfortunately, in that situation, it took them about 3 weeks for them to get approval from IT to actually open up that Discord channel, which meant that they had to delay their release by a whole week as a result of that subtlety in the interaction. And the general idea that we really capture as we kind of think about this is, the most part, the actions that are being taken by the employees in our organization are not malicious. They're not malevolent. They're the employees trying to get their work done in the most efficient way possible. And when we think about these controls and we think about introducing these controls, things that cause disruption to an employee trying to get their work done has a major reaction. Things that require them and to be clear, in order to clarify this, we have labeled this the punitive scenario in our studies and findings. But of course, we didn't use any of that language as we presented that to the user. We are not calling security awareness training punitive, but the reality is most people who've sat through a few of those do associate those two words together. But let's move on from these scenarios and start to understand the impact in what we found as we went through this. So the first thing that was very clear is the participants' attitudes and emotions strongly predicted their security behavior. So their attitude related to the response and emotional reaction to that response very directly linked to the actual end behaviors that they took after they received those interventions. Aaron, this probably isn't terribly surprising to you, but can you give us a little color on
Yeah, sure. And this is, I mean, there are some domains and sometimes in which it doesn't. And the fact that it does here is important, right? In organizational context, behavior is almost always driven by, I mean, sometimes you do have habits and so forth, and those sort of happen automatically. But when it comes to our deliberate things, downloading of software and thinking about how I'm going to do things, our perceptions, and when we say perception, we don't mean like vision and so forth. Just to be clear, we mean what you understand about the reason things are being done, and our emotions really are the basis of our behavior. And something really important to understand is that it's not going to just affect the behavior in terms of, do we look for a workaround or not, or do we do it anyways? It's also going to affect our relationship with whoever we think is management, whoever we think was in charge of preventing us from doing the things we want to do. And that drives a huge amount of behavior. So if we think management doesn't respect us and doesn't trust us, that drives a lot of things beyond even just the security space. It drives turnover. It drives, white collar crime. It drives what we call extra organizational behavior, citizenship behaviors, all kinds of things, happiness at the workplace. So the way we manage emotions in the security space is going to have huge impact on a lot of other things if it's leading to emotions and perceptions that make us unhappy in this domain, make us feel untrusted and not respected, which I think is a big part of what was happening with sort of the classic security paradigm.
That's a really interesting commentary, how this impacts broader than just the cybersecurity compliance or the security behaviors. Mike, that has been certainly a topic discussion over the last year and perhaps the last two overall. But what from your perception, has been the importance of employee experience in the broader design of cybersecurity programs?
I guess I can, roughly say that as a very general assessment, probably a little unfair. Most security folks don't really understand a lot about user experience, right? So when you think about, kind of what a typical SOC analyst has to do, it's not really something that's intuitive at all. It's kind of has its own, kind of lingua franca and its own way of doing things. And, folks, and again, you mentioned, one of the first things you mentioned, Russ, was, the skills gap, right? So we're having a whole bunch of new people come in, and it's like we're talking a different space alien language in terms of how we do things in security. That's mapped into how we expect our users to protect themselves, right? How they're supposed to know that, kind of something is potentially malicious versus, kind of legitimate. We kind of speak in these coded languages that, again, just are not intuitive for the general population. And listen, when we started in this business, I'll date myself, right? 30 something years ago, Russ is younger. So, it's not as long as that, but he's not young. I'll let you know. So when we started a long time ago, in this business, right, it wasn't a thing. So we could kind of dictate how it would have to go. And now that it is a universal thing where every employee of every organization has to handle and deal with a lot of these threats, we really have to think differently about user experience. We have to think differently about, again, kind of persuasion, right? Persuasion of how we get our employees to do the right thing to control the risk of the organization without, them, again, kind of rankling their ires or kind of putting them at kind of suspicion that the organization is trying to get me to do something that I don't want, or taking away something that I should have the ability to do, right, Aaron? I mean, that's a lot of the research that you're doing, and it's a time tested and time honored tradition that security folks are right. Just ask them. We know what's right for the organization. We know how to control the risk. Just do what we say. And again, 20 years later, I think we've proven that maybe this draconian approach hasn't been as effective as we would have hoped.
And one thing I could add there, really interesting insights, is that like we've evolved to want our freedom, people have also evolved to be hyper aware of anything that suggests from our group that we're not trusted and respected. So if we were living amongst some sort of group, wandering around, and we weren't respected or trusted in that group, it was a big threat to us, right? You could be cast aside and left aside. And so your company can do a lot of things that make you feel great or they're neutral, and a couple of things that make you feel, wow, they don't trust me or they don't respect me, so they're not really think that I'm valuable, can set off a whole chain of reactions. And the way that the security method was sort of designed is something that people, to the detriment of people who are in the security space, people are just going to be really, really acutely attuned to feeling like they're not trusted. It's just something that has helped us survive. Because
they're not, Aaron. I mean, that when you get down to it, that's the core problem, is that, folks do, they're humans. And one of the adages that my partner, Rich Mogul, would talk about is, if your security program depends on some changing human nature, it's probably not going to be very successful. Right. And I think we continue to bang up into that reality almost every day.
My guess is that the security people thought, though, that you could say, look, we don't trust you in security, but we trust you as a person, as an employee. But that's not how people work. That, you show me you don't trust me, and I think you don't trust me.
I'm not
in
so
general.
Sure. You're ascribing a level of kind of beneficiary that I'm not sure a lot of security folks have earned over time.
Fair enough.
What's interesting, I think, about all of that is I think the traditional security approach, in a cynical description, has really treated our employees as an extension of the computers that we're protecting, where we expect those employees to behave as predictably as the software that we have running on those computers, which, depending on who made the software, is less predictable than others. But for the most part, we say, okay, we're deploying a control. Once we deploy this control, we expect people to comply with that. And that's really interesting as we kind of look at the next finding as we came across here, is we actually found that people felt positive in a large part about those security nudges. And I think that does go back to the comments that you were making there, Mike, as well as Aaron, about that idea of trust, which is, when you think about the nature of how that nudge was presented, it's a substantially better received intervention than any of the other scenarios and conditions. And I think that's largely, if I'm going to, pull a little further, is because we are treating people with respect and trust, but we are engaging with them about a potential issue, which is not making it about them, it's making it about the larger scenario. Aaron, any corrections you would have to my reading?
No, just an addition is that this one finding surprised me a bit. When we first talked, I had anticipated that everyone was going to dislike everything, but dislike nudging less than they would dislike the other things. And the fact that we're getting a decent percentage of people actually on the positive side here, that surprised me. Usually you're just getting less reactants, and that's what you go for, and just get people to act rational. But to get the positive emotion is showing it was a surprising effect to me. So it was good news.
And, I think that might have a little to do with the historical context of probably most of these employees, who are pretty typically, preconditioned to the blocking intervention or the punitive intervention, because that has largely what they've been seen in the past. And so now when we're introducing something that's treating them with a little bit of respect and trust in the context of this security scenario, I would imagine that probably increases their positive reaction to that, because it's surprising, novel, new in their experience.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, Russ, is that, you know, the back end of this, the follow up, right? That really makes all the difference. So in concept, yes, I mean, I think that most rational humans would look and say a nudge makes a lot more sense given all the reasons and psychographics and you know, just common sense in terms of the best way to behave. But I can remember a direct analogy, right? You know, kind of whitelisting when we first started rolling out whitelisting on endpoints because we couldn't figure out how to control that. It was, you know, not a similar thing, but, you know, it was, hey, we're going to block this stuff because we don't know what it is. And you know, but we're going to do that with a mechanism on the back end to, you know, again, mediate, you know, and kind of determine whether this is a legitimate application or not. And the problem with those tools is that it became a huge bottleneck and nobody was looking at the requests and folks were out of business all the same. So it became a blocking effort, right? It became one of those things where we told you we're going to take a look at this, but we don't look at it, right? So if anything, it's you dangled out this, hey, we're really going to trust you and we want to talk about this situation, and then it fell into some black hole of you know, kind of an you know, mitigated, you know, kind of situation, and folks felt even worse about the technology. And I think that, you know, if anything, maybe you've had a huge issue in terms of getting users on board with something like whitelisting. So again, I love the idea of the nudge, but a lot of the back end process has to be there within the companies too, to make sure they're processing these things in a timely enough manner so that folks do realize that, yeah, your opinion is important. We want to work with you, and this is what we're doing to address this situation you have.
And I think that commentary is a great lead into the next finding, which is really a composite of the first two, which is we saw a positive reaction to the nudge, and then we saw a very strong likelihood of compliance with the nudge. The idea that I can get 78% of my employees to do anything is frankly, you know, unheard of, apart from perhaps, you know, registering for health benefits, right? And so when we look at the ability to actually start to get engagement in a positive way with these employees, it's really pretty exciting to see what opportunities we have ahead of us when we look at the use of this methodology in the cybersecurity space. Aaron, any thoughts on the numbers that we're seeing?
Yeah, just again to remark on how impressive it is, because if there is a bias that people hold that would work against something like what you're doing, it's sort of the status quo bias. People start to learn that the status quo is what they feel safe in it. They don't want things to change. Change tends to be scary. And so it's hard, even though they might not like certain aspects of the status quo, change is just, who knows where that's going to take people. And there's loss aversion. They're worried about it. So if we just ran a random study where we said, here's something different than now, people just don't like different no matter what we make that. And so the fact that you're seeing people, as you set it up before, this is in the context of these is a different way of doing things than they're used to. You're seeing so many people be positive about it, suggests there is really a desire amongst these people to really want this change, because the default is we don't want change.
And, you know, the way you present that really kind of settles home to me my general experience, which is, for the most part, every employee today has some awareness of the impact cybersecurity has on their organization. They also have some desire to not be the person who steps over the line and causes their whole organization to have a massive security event, which is a very selfish projection. But even beyond that, I think most people do feel some responsibility for, you know, holding up the cybersecurity of the organization. And so when I kind of look at those pieces together, it is not as surprising to see an opportunity when we're engaging with those employees in a way that's proactive, in a way that sort of, you know, extends that trust to them and asks them to be a part of that cybersecurity program. I do see that there is a lot of opportunity for positive reception there, just because I do fundamentally believe most employees have that awareness and have that desire. Mike, do you think that's too naive and optimistic, or do you think that's a fair view of the world out there?
No, I mean, I think that it is, you know, reasonable to expect employees to want to do the right thing for the organization, right? And I do think that there is a great disincentive to be the person who's responsible for X with X being a pretty bad outcome, right? So people, again, unless for whatever reason they feel untouchable in the organization, and there are some like that, right? I mean, and if you spend any times on the front line, the number of times where you're cleaning up somebody's device, even though you say you really can't do that stuff, right? And they continue to do that stuff. It's because they don't care, right? They're just like, you know what? I bring in enough, value to this organization. I'm untouchable. Go screw yourself. And I think the reality is we've seen that those rules don't apply in a lot of situations now. Folks from the highest echelon, depending on what it is that they do, especially on a cultural basis, can be summarily rejected and torpedoed out of their organization. So again, I think it gets back to the human behavior, which is most folks, and by most I mean pretty much everybody, wants to do the right thing for the organization. It's not like they get up in the morning and say, how can I, screw people over? Or how can I do the wrong thing, right? They want to do the right thing. Sometimes technology just makes it too hard. And if we can make that easier in order to comply with kind of rules and policies that in fact reduce risk, that's really a win-win for everybody. And I think that's what we've been searching for a long time.
I think that's really well put. The other side of this finding is what happens in that block scenario, which, again, based on my personal behavior, I looked at it and I was like, yeah, that looks about right for me, which is, when I'm trying to accomplish something at work, I'm always doing something at work for the company, right? And when somebody comes up and throws up a, blocking scenario, usually I'm like, all right, time to turn off the corporate VPN. Let's try the other way around, right? And so what we found is that held true in the sample set. So for the 300 some odd participants that presented that blocking scenario, 67% said that they would actively look for a workaround in order to accomplish the work task that they were presented with. Aaron, did this surprise you at all, or was this sort of in line?
No, and this is one of them where I think it's even worse than the data look, because what we're not capturing here is that probably what's also going to happen is they're going to be very upset just that it was blocked, right? So not only are they going to look for a workaround, but they're going to be mad that this happened. And also they're going to, whatever application they weren't allowed to use that they felt was maybe vaguely important or they'd like to be curious about, now they're going to feel like they're more likely to feel like they need it. And by you taking it away from me, you're really not letting me do my job. And so it's not just that they want it and they're not going to comply with you. They're going to think they wanted it even more. And that's part of the reactance effect. And so I think that all is going to, and that's going to lead to more frustration and so forth, and even a bigger desire to look for that workaround.
Yeah, you bet, Russ. I got to tell you that the first story you told about the Discord server and folks pushing a release back a week out, I'm like, you know what? I don't believe that, right? Because I've worked with enough developers over 30 something years to know that, somebody is going to fire up, something from home or get off the corporate VPN or, use an iPad or some other type of Chromebook or something like that. And they're going to get on a Discord and they're going to solve their problem, because they'll be damned if they're going to push a release a week because of some, wacky, stupid policy out of corporate. Right. I mean, so I appreciate the example. I just can't think of one development organization I've ever worked with that would have suffered for that.
That's a really good example, Mike. Perhaps they were going to miss the release date anyways. Per week.
Okay. So then you get into, I don't know what Aaron would say about that, but that's a good
next time around and see what actually happened. Well, so that kind of pulls together the key findings in our research, and we actually have a much fuller research paper that we're releasing shortly that goes into a lot more depth in this. But when we kind of think about these pieces overall, I think there's a lot that we can take away in terms of improving our security program and really thinking about what we can do next in order to brace some of this new research and in order to improve not only that employee experience, but participation and find new ways to go through this. Mike, any thoughts as you kind of think about how this might impact some of the decisions people are making on a day-to-day basis in terms of how to structure?
I do, right? Because at the end of the day, organizations want to protect their critical data, right? Their customer data, their intellectual property, all of that stuff that drives our business. We are chartered from a security practitioner standpoint to protect. And I think, taking a different, somewhat innovative approach to getting our employees on board, since they're still the weakest link, right? So I think that this is a pretty, again, interesting approach. It's based upon like science, right? And real behavior and emotion. And that's something that has been, I think, horribly lacking in a lot of the security practices that we have inflicted upon our organizations for many years. And again, what I would love to do is turn it around a little bit, Russ, and get a sense of how you guys got to this place, right? And again, one of the benefits of being, kind of a friend of yours for a long time is that we've been talking about Nudge for a long time. Right. When you and Jaime were, kind of had not even a PowerPoint, we were like brainstorming and spitballing about, different approaches to do different things. So where you ended up is really interesting. Right. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, and again, I wouldn't, kind of go into it for an hour. Right. But, just that user progression in terms of what you learn to get you to the point where, nudge is, or the idea of a nudge is really kind of an approach that made sense for customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be, fair, my interest in sort of borderline obsession with this space actually goes quite a bit further back than origins of this company. A lot of the work that I've done and a lot of the thinking that I've done around cybersecurity is just trying to understand organizational dynamics and incentives. And particularly in the work in security analytics that I've done in the past, how much work do you need to do in order to make it more expensive for the ransomware, campaigns to target you as opposed to the next company down the path? Or how much detection capabilities do you need to do in order to, disrupt the kill chain of in a campaign or attack against your organization? Really drives home the point of this whole system that we're operating in is a complex environment of incentives and motivations. And then when I sort of really pulled that out, I started to realize that we've done all this great work and all this deep thinking about the incentives and motivations of our adversaries. And we hadn't done a whole lot of thinking at all about the incentives and motivations of our own employees, who are largely the front lines of that defense. And so really that was the genesis of, a lot of the efforts that we put into Nudge. But then the other reality came to play when we started to focus on our core area of expertise, which is, of course, the discovery of SaaS services. And you've lived this alongside everybody else out there, which is for the last 5 to 10 years, we've gone from a centralized procurement of IT to a completely distributed procurement of IT, right? These days, more than 50% of the technology in any organization has been adopted by an employee, by a team, and then, across the organization. And that's how SaaS companies are designed. And so when we kind of looked at that shift in model, we realized that the only way we were going to help organizations turn the tide on that is actually engaging those employees to be part of that solution. And that's where two pieces really came together in just such a great light, and where we started doing our work with Aaron, which was we realized that if we adapted some of this research that's been done for years in other domains and started to apply it here, how can we restructure the incentives, the motivations? How can we change the reaction of these employees in order to make them part of the solution to managing, to controlling, to governing the massive sprawl of SaaS technology that we see in our organizations? And so I appreciate that's a long-winded response, but it did take me a while to get there. And I promise you it was longer than the 2 minutes I just spent.
Oh, I remember. I mean, I knew we went back and forth on a number of different, kind of concepts to, go through that. And again, from a practitioner, right, a program builder, a security program builder's, standpoint, again, it does take a very innovative approach to a problem that we all have, which is, again, it's not a matter of just, hey, we can passively monitor the network and, see where the, web requests are going and figuring out where those are legit. I mean, yeah, we still have to do that, right? Network detection and response is still a thing. And we've got to, track command and control traffic and all of that, kind of stuff. But the reality is the world still revolves around email. Whenever you sign up for something, you get an email. Whenever and if anything, this movement towards cloud-based email, really gives us, there's no incentive to clean up your mailbox, right? And I'm a pretty anal guy, but at some point I realized that, I have all this email, and in order to find something, it's just a lot more efficient for me to get better at searching for it, right? Than trying to, curate all my, kind of files to get to inbox zero and, all my files and folders. So now I just have, thousands of messages in my inbox because I don't care. Right. I search for what I see. I kind of set notes for the things that need to be there. So, it was also that innovation as well, which is, being able to determine what people are using based upon their email, responses and the email notifications they get as a trigger for, somebody signing up for a new service was also, again, I think a pretty innovative way to get in front of a lot of the usage characteristics of most employees today.
No, excellent point, Michael. Michael, I just got really formal with you for some reason. I'm not quite sure what just happened. There's some logical principle that Aaron can explain. But excellent point. When you brought up some of our methodology there, which is when we think about effectively engaging users and engaging users at critical junctures and at the point of critical activity, which is really the necessary point. I can't do that if I'm monitoring the network. I don't know if you're going to GitHub to upload corporate IP, to look at open source code, to read marketing material, to read somebody's code, right? I don't have that visibility at that network level. And so what we really searched for was, how do we get a higher visibility, higher granularity in terms of the action, as well as a solution that doesn't depend upon people driving to work and working from their desktop plugged into the local LAN, right? Too many people, too many devices, too many places these days to really effectively rely on that. And so our approach was really to take advantage of the core design principle of any SaaS service out there, which is the only universal communication mechanism on the internet is email. And so we monitor that communication channel, which gives us these opportunities for these just-in-time nudges to intervene with those employees as they're making these critical junctions, whether they're signing up for a service or, starting an account recovery or requesting a data dump from their, CRM system. All of those opportunities are now available to us with a simple integration point that gives us universal visibility across the organization. So absolutely, that technology enabled the approach as well. And without those two, it's very, sort of a conjoined service. For sure.
Yeah, no, that's great. So let's, kind of start moving towards what do folks do, right? Hey, it's an interesting concept. Folks, want to nudge a little bit and start to experiment out. What does that look like from an implementation standpoint if you wanted to, start playing with this in your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's so great right now is we're at such an early phase in actually wrangling SaaS sprawl. And so the reality is most organizations, and we, part of the beauty is our data actually goes back historically as well. So we were able to see a doubling of the adoption of SaaS services in March of 2020. Not a horrible surprise, but everybody got sent home. Everybody was working from home. And we saw a rate of, one every 2 weeks down to one every week. So every organization is dealing with new SaaS services. And getting started is very simple. Understand your supply chain, understand what is being used in your organization. And so we use a simple information gathering nudge as the first step for most of our organizations to just say, whenever there's a new app introduced, engage with that user, understand what that app's being used for, understand what data is going into it. So we have a justification and need and a clear record of that. And one of the impacts that we've started to see, and hopefully we'll gather more data on it, is that simple intervention starts to help people recognize the fact that introducing a new app to the organization does have some security relevance, which is something that most people don't recognize. And so that simple intervention gives us an opportunity to start changing that adoption rate to start engaging with those employees in an effective manner, but also building out that centralized understanding. Very simple to get started, very easy to go. It's something that people can get automated within a few seconds. But then as you go forward to the future, there's a lot of complicated tasks that just require the engagement of end users. Hey, I want to onboard something to a single sign-on system to Okta or Azure AD. Well, great. We'll automate that task, and the person who introduces the app or the technical owner of the app will get put in touch with the single sign-on provider. Or somebody creating AWS accounts that don't have onboarded to centralized control. Or somebody wants to do a SOC 2 or an access review report. Or somebody wants to know if somebody's even using it. All of those are simple engagement opportunities for us to leverage nudges in order to go forward. But I think the broader takeaway from the research that we have here, even outside the context of nudge, is really thinking about that employee experience, really thinking about those expectations, and really looking for opportunities in your security program to change the nature of how you're engaging those employees, regardless of the detection mechanism, regardless of the activity, in order to embrace them and co-opt them to be a part of your program, as opposed to just treating them as another technical problem that needs to be resolved. And I think that's the big takeaway that I think everybody can kind of take a critical eye, regardless of what technology they're using and how they're using it, in order to improve this and take advantage of the research that we've done today.
No, that's great. I think, again, Russ, you made a pretty compelling, kind of case for why this is a pretty interesting approach. Obviously, Aaron, I think your research is groundbreaking in terms of really trying to help, again, what are a bunch of rock-headed, very opinionated security folks who know they're right. Just ask them.
Not the ones I've met so far. They've all been great.
You've been working with the good ones. I know a lot of folks who, it's just like, we're going to do it this way. And, we shake our fists at the cloud a lot, right? Because it's changed a lot of how we've had to do things. But I do think it is something that we have to start thinking differently. We have to start thinking innovatively. I'm a part of how we're going to solve some of these problems, because, we can throw more technology at it for sure. Right. We can continue to educate our employees, and I think we need to continue to do that. But ultimately, if we want to be successful, I think we do have to start playing into psychology a little bit more than we have in the past. And really trying to leverage, again, some of the capabilities that we have based upon the technologies that are really permeating in order to try to, change things up a bit.
Well said, Mike. Well, thank you both for giving us a chance to talk through this today. I really appreciate your commentary and feedback, and I hope everybody found it informative. Thank you all.
Thank you.
So we're going to turn it back over to Cody now, who's going to wrap some stuff up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Russell, Aaron, and Mike. I really appreciate the depth that you go into whenever you guys get together and have these conversations. So thank you so much for the work that goes into it. So today's session was recorded. Following this program, you'll receive an email with a link to access that recording on demand, or you can find the recording living on the Security Boulevard website at securityboulevard.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. It will be there waiting for you. So at the top of the hour, we mentioned 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. Our winners are Elizabeth B., Ahmet C., Josh W., and Kathy A. So congratulations to our 4 winners. Keep an eye on your email inbox to claim that gift card. But if you don't happen to receive that email, do check your spam folder. I'd like to thank Nudge Security for sponsoring today's program. And to our audience, we really, really appreciate you spending the last 50 or so minutes with us. We do just want to ask for one extra moment of your time for a survey that should pop up on your screen here in just a moment as soon as we close out. But otherwise, we do hope to see everyone at an upcoming Techstrong Learning program. Everyone, have a great rest of your day. And to our panel, thank you once again.